Hello.
Hi.
Welcome to the 12th House podcast. Happy January.
Happy 2023. We've crossed over.
We are coming to you from the past into the future. We have crossed over. The other day, Janelle and I were talking about how sometimes you come back from the holiday actually not rested because you're traveling, you're with family, you're triggered, you're trying to do a bunch of things, and then you relax, maybe you get sick, and then you start the new year and you're like, wait a second, this is not a new me.
Yeah. No, that's not sometimes for me. That's every time. I always need a vacation after a vacation.
Exactly.
The amount of energy I exerted on vacation needs me to rest immediately. I also think there's that anticipation of coming back to work that always feels a little energetically pulling, where you're like, okay, I had a great vacation, but now I got to go back and do all these things. And like you immediately go back into going to rest and hibernate mode. The other thing that I will say is, to your point, it's winter. Like nobody wants to work in the winter. It's dead season. We're supposed to be like renewed and alive and happy, but it's like literally things are dying during this time. Like our nature is doing the opposite. So I think it's really counterintuitive what we've done for ourselves here.
It's true. It's so capitalistic. Shocker. Last week on the pod, we were talking about this idea of spiritual productivity and being, what you turn towards when you're feeling in a moment of spiritual crisis or growth. And part of what we're doing this month on the podcast is speaking not only to that, but also what it means to be a squiggly brain, neuro-divergent, creative, intuitive entrepreneur, solopreneur, and speaking with different people about their diagnoses and how they run their businesses according to the self-knowledge that they've gained through their diagnoses.
Wow, you said that so well. Please keep going.
and today we have Pia Beck from Curate on, who is graciously sharing her experience about having OCD and running her business and what that's been like for her. So honestly, we're not going to ramble on too much because it's a long conversation and it's a fantastic conversation between the three of us. So we can't wait for you to listen.
Yeah, just listen. Check it out.
Pia, it's so lovely to have you here with us on the 12th House podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about having you in this conversation, and also just to celebrate what you do at Curate Wellness Co. I really am excited to highlight some of your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, this month we are focusing on the podcast on talking about squiggly brains, what we have called squiggly brains, and different neurodivergent diagnoses or identifications. And I know that you had talked a little bit with Janelle previously about your OCD diagnosis. And I think right away when Janelle and I were talking about it, for us and for me personally, it was so inspiring to meet other entrepreneurs and business owners who are open to talk about, their diagnoses and how they deal with them. So we're very excited to get into it.
Yeah.
I know this is the first time that I'm kind of talking about the whole thing all at once. I've shared bits and pieces.
Oh, so we're getting the exclusive.
You're getting the exclusive.
I love it.
Well, we are so lucky. So to go way back, we will come to that point. But how long ago did you start Curate Well Co?
So let's see. I guess technically, officially, legally started the business in late 2018. I would say that it wasn't really until 2019 that it was a thing. So I went full time May 2019. So it's been about 3 years and some change.
Almost 4. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's grown pretty exponentially, very quickly.
Yeah, we've seen pretty consistent year-over-year growth. We take a pretty, I would say, long-term perspective. So we didn't have that kind of viral overnight growth that I think you sometimes see in businesses that have a strong online anchor. And I'm super proud of everything that we've done over the past 3-ish years. And it also feels really cool to know that we're like kind of just getting started in a way too.
I mean, we talk a lot about sustainability here and the idea that you should be able to work consistently at the pace that you're working at for, you know, indefinitely. And I think when you say we didn't have that viral success, it's like, yeah, well, virality is not sustainable
at all.
Totally. Yeah.
And did you, thinking about your identification with, or I shouldn't say identification with, I'll let you speak to it, but have you known that you've had OCD for a long time? Was that something that you found out when you were younger?
Yeah, good question. So, it is something I identify with. So you can totally use that language, at least with me. I don't really know the protocol on using that language with like other people, but with me, it's totally fine. And no, it was actually, so I got my diagnosis about a year ago. So very much in my adult life. I'm 28. I always have to think about that for a sec. It's actually late for an OCD diagnosis. It usually happens a little bit earlier than that. And it can happen later. Looking back, I can like see obviously in my life all the ways that it was manifesting and how it impacted my childhood and my adolescence and my teenage years and my like, you know, all of those things. But I didn't know. And, so I've known for about a year. And even when I got the diagnosis, I was like caught super off guard, right? Like I went to a psychiatrist because I was struggling with some like feelings of depression and anxiety. And I'm like totally prepared for that conversation. And, you know, at the end of our time together, he was like, yeah, so you have OCD. And I was like, what? I was like, that's not why I came here. That's not what's wrong with me. And so, that was I didn't really know anything about it. And then, but I kind of was like, okay, and did some research kind of following that meeting and like everything clicked. And I was like, oh yes, I like definitely have OCD.
Don't you love that when you're like, oh, it all makes sense? Like,
Totally.
It's not just like these disparate pieces of information about yourself that you're like, is something wrong with me? It's like, oh, no. It's a thing.
Totally. It's, there's a lot of stigma around OCD still. And it was like one of the best things that's ever happened to me. Like so freeing, so validating, so comforting in a lot of ways too, to like have, you know, something to name and to hold on to and learn about and explore.
And like make meaning of so many of those places where you're like, why? Is it just me? Am I the only one who like fill in the blank? I also feel like people I'm curious if you've experienced this, but I feel like people use OCD as a very casual term.
100%.
And I think sometimes also ADHD, I feel like that's more common, but people are always like, oh yeah, I'm just OCD about fill in the blank, or it's just my OCD tendencies.
Totally.
And I think I realized a few years ago when I had a friend who also was diagnosed, I was like, oh, I actually never used this term correctly. I didn't even know what it was.
Yeah, totally. It's one of those things that I think people do kind of like throw around loosely. And I did too for a long time and like, you know, joke's on me, but I don't take offense to it so much. And I think now I have a new perspective on just like the lack of education that's out there on it, right? Because it took me so much of my life to like get that diagnosis because it's not talked about in the same way as a lot of other mental challenges, illnesses, whatever you want to call it. So yes, I'm like noticing that a lot more now, that people just kind of throw it around like that. And it's not something that makes me upset, but it's more so just kind of like a reminder of like, oh, there's so much like conversation left to have around this.
Absolutely.
I'm curious if you know, I know that a lot of neurodivergencies are, particularly for women, it's harder to diagnose, or I won't say it's harder to diagnose. They just haven't done as much work to, with women all around in health. Do you have any idea if, being a woman or identifying or female identifying, if that had anything to do with the amount of time it took for you to get diagnosed with OCD?
That's a really good question. I don't have any data on that. and it's not something I've explored, so I don't know for sure.
Fair.
What I do know is that it's really common for it to take a long time to diagnose OCD. So a couple of facts just for anyone who's listening to this who is realizing that they like maybe don't know that much about OCD. So it's the 4th most common mental disorder.
Wow.
Right?
I had no idea.
I know. Which is shocking, right? Because it's not talked about. So depression, alcohol and substance misuse, social phobia, and then OCD.
Whoa, mind blown. Sorry. I'm shocked.
Right?
Social phobia. I'm also like,
yeah, interesting.
Don't know that one.
Yeah. And it usually takes somewhere between like 14 and 17 years between the onset of symptoms and being able to like get treatment for OCD.
Yo, I'm shocked. This is insane.
Yeah. So it's like awareness and education and like access, right? Which is true of, you know, a lot of things, unfortunately. But I would say like awareness and education are really big factors. So I don't know if there's a correlation with gender identity. What I do know is just like for the condition as a whole, it's really, really common for people to go undiagnosed for a long time. There's also a lot of like shame wrapped up in the experience of OCD, which factors into that. And I think that, you know, people just don't know a lot about it, right? It's really misrepresented in the media, at least in part. And so the WHO actually ranks OCD as one of the 10 most handicapping conditions of any kind, including physical disease, right? So, you know, you hear a lot about ADD, ADHD, anxiety, depression. Like these things have become so much more normalized in our culture, especially over the last couple of years, which is fantastic. And then there's, you know, a whole other subset of experiences that people are having that, you know, just kind of like didn't make it into that, like, these are things we talk about now. And OCD is one of them. And a lot of the, let's call it, conditions that have a lot of like research and money and publicity behind them aren't on that top 10. And OCD is.
I wonder why that is. Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
Like what, I guess, agenda is tied to those other, and that's what I go to immediately is like, who's making money, you know?
Yeah. I don't know. Someone, I'm sure. And I think that, you know, it's partially just stigma.
Yeah.
I think it's partially stigma, and I think it's partially the fact that, you know, a lot of people don't know. And if they do know, they don't talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, even just that, to your point, the education piece around it, where if it takes 17 years on average to diagnose it, it's like, okay, well, clearly we also don't know what the signs are, both ourselves and then even on the medical side, treatment side.
Yeah, because I imagine, I mean, again, I feel like my exposure to obsessive compulsive disorder is only through television.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I have a very finite idea when I think about what that looks like, of what that is. And I'm sure that there are millions of ways that can manifest that I have no idea.
Yeah, so there's a couple main types of OCD. So there's checking and, which also looks like repeating, right? So one of the things that you see in the media all the time is like someone flipping a light switch, right? They're like, I have to flip this light switch, 30 times or whatever. Like that is one type of OCD. Or, if someone, has to they're leaving their house and they're getting into the car and they're like, oh, I have to make sure I didn't leave the oven on, right? And they go in and check, but they have to go in and check more than once, like multiple times until, they feel like they can actually leave. So checking and repeating is kind of one category. Contamination is another type of OCD. So this is also a lot of the time what you see in the media, right?
Yeah.
People who are, washing their hands. Exactly. So those are kind of like the two types that you see. And then there's order and symmetry, which I think sometimes you see, but it's usually in like a very extreme representation versus like what it actually kind of looks like day to day. And then there's a type that's just intrusive thoughts. And that's never represented.
Wow. What, can you explain a little bit? I'm sorry. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about that. Like, what does that look
totally.
like?
So, so the type of, I primarily have intrusive thoughts OCD with like a little bit of order and symmetry thrown in. And so really what it means is, just like a pretty extreme, like lack of control of your thoughts, right? It's literally just like unwanted thoughts, fears, etc., that like you can't let go of, right? So for example, for me, that manifests as like worry and anxiety. And a lot of the time, like growing up in my life, I had so many people tell me like, just let it go. And it's like, I literally can't.
Yeah.
Right. It's not that I don't want to.
Right. I know, right? Totally. Exactly. Just let it go. Okay.
I mean, this was, however, 20, 30 years ago, sure. Right? When like there wasn't, helpful, supportive dialogue around like mental experiences. But it was like, oh, you're like, stop and smell the roses, right? Or like, oh, you're so rigid, or just let it go, or whatever. And it's just like, and, I always just felt like, you think I don't want to? Like, yeah. Do you think it's fun to like be like latched on to this thought that like you can tell is like distressing for me? Like, imagine how distressing that is for me, right? But it's just like, it's just there. And like, totally. You seek ways to find relief from that, but unsuccessfully, right? That's the whole part of OCD, is that it's chronic, right? So you might get short-term relief, you might get momentary relief, but it's, you can't go for a walk and like, not have that thought anymore.
Right.
I mean, I have not heard about that component of OCD, and that feels like, I mean, it all honestly seems like it could be very debilitating, but I feel like something that is so internal would just feel so frustrating to have to navigate on a consistent basis until you figure out, I guess, how to figure it out. But it's surprising to me that it isn't talked about, and that it's the fourth most, you said it's like the fourth most, like mental illness. What is it? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Fourth most common mental disorder. Mm-hmm.
Well, I also imagine with our culture that is so productivity and work obsessed as it relates to your value as a human being, that it's very hard to talk about something like intrusive thoughts that are hard to understand, maybe hard to study, and then hard to provide, consistent treatment because it must be so individual and contextual. And then it also really rubs against our culture that is like, just let it go.
Right.
Just carry on. Yeah,
right.
Just suck it up. Yeah.
Totally. So suck it up was like a huge narrative growing up in my childhood, right? Like that's how I was raised in, the Midwest, where there's like a very strong culture around like hard work and like doing the right thing. My parents really wanted to raise me to be like an independent person, right? And resilient and like all of these things. And so there was like this huge conversation of like, just suck it up. And sometimes that was explicit, like, right, like with those words, and other times it wasn't. But I think that was a huge part too of why I downplayed like this internal experience that I was having, right? Where it's like, oh, just suck it up. It's like, yeah, these are just thoughts, right? I just like suck it up and move on. So totally that.
I'm curious, was there any point, Pia, where you were having these experiences and you questioned whether or not there was something larger going on before? I mean, like when you were younger, I guess, before you got to the diagnosis or got to a place where you were seeing a doctor maybe, or was there any point where you were like, this might not be me? Or did you feel like there was something wrong with you?
Totally. I would say for like most of my like conscious life, right? Like since I was like a toddler, I think like sensed that I was like experiencing something different than the people around me. And, OCD is like very isolating, right? Because like there's this whole internal dialogue and like set of activities that are like closely linked to that are like taking over one of the lenses through which you view the world that other people aren't even aware of. Wow. And so there was always this sense of like difference and a sense of like divide almost, and like a loneliness that I felt my entire life. And I think I went through like different phases of thinking like, is there something wrong with me? Or like is this just like who I am? And like, I am just, different than some of these people, or, whatever. It was always there. And I think it just like, I named it differently in different phases of my life. And I think that going back to what you were saying about gender identities, I think like as a woman identifying person, I like took the responsibility of that.
Yeah.
In like growing up, right? I was like, okay, so like I do feel different and like that's on me, right? Like I'm doing something or I'm, you know, the one who's in charge of like managing this as it relates to like everything around me.
Yeah.
So yes.
In a sense, still kind of making yourself wrong, right? Like,
totally.
Even though there's like a detachment from it, that's like, yeah, it's my responsibility, so I have the authority over it, but because it's not going right, I'm wrong and I'm doing it wrong. I'm sorry,
100%. 100%. No. That's, I mean, a lot of what I've unpacked in therapy and a lot of my adult life is this like, this feeling of like being wrong, right? Yeah. Or like I'm a bad person and I think that's a huge part of it, right? Is like the sense of like, oh yeah, like I'm experiencing the world differently than the people around me. And so by default, that's less or wrong or bad or whatever. So hugely that. But it's really interesting, like going back to one of the points that you made earlier of like, you know, people don't know the signs. I think it really is like an awareness thing because now I look back and I'm like, all the signs were there, right? Like now I can totally see them, but I didn't see them. My parents didn't see them. The people in my life didn't see them. And I think it can manifest differently for every person, but there's also some like really like obvious things. So like, for example, there's this picture of me. I'm like maybe 3 and I'm like sitting in my bed and I had lined up all of my stuffed animals in like size order and like I'm at the end. So like Beanie Baby, like all the way over on one side and like 3-year-old Pia, you know, like all the way on the other side. And there's like 30 stuffed animals, like every stuffed animal I owned, like lined up, like sitting up against the wall, you know, like we do, and like in size order. And my parents obviously thought it was like funny and cute and like weird enough to like take a picture of it. But there was no thought of like, why did she do that? Right? Or like, what is going on here? Like kids don't line up their stuffed animals in size order when they're 3 years old, right? They don't even like put them away. And then, you know, in high school, I like had some disordered eating, which was, I think, you know, like me looking for like some way to like feel a sense of control when a lot of my thoughts like weren't in my control. And high school and college, like overconsumption of alcohol, like trying to like feel that like numbness and like escape and stuff like that. Yeah. So, you know, I had like that whole rebellious teenage phase with my parents where they were like, what are you doing? Right? Cause I was like partying and making terrible decisions and all of this. And yet there was not ever a discussion of like, why are you doing this? Why do you feel like you want to go out and like drink to the point of like, you know,
obliteration.
Exactly. Right. Obliteration. Totally. Yeah. I've been totally there. What it was, right? And it was just like, it was an escape. It was just like not thinking and feeling the things that I was thinking and feeling, but that wasn't part of the discussion, right? It was like, why are you doing this? Like you are smart and you are, you know better than this. Like, why are you doing this? And I was kind of just like, I'm just doing it. It feels great. Yeah. So I think that there's, I don't know exactly what the signs look like, you know, across lots of people. And I can say with some degree of certainty that I think that there is a need for awareness on what that could be.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, you saying that really makes me wonder and feel in my heart. I think I'm just thinking about the amount of people who have gone undiagnosed who are probably dealing with substance abuse right now.
Yeah.
And not understanding why, which is like really heartbreaking to think about.
Well, and I think with certain things like ADHD, I've heard from so many people, and I'll include myself in this, like not getting a diagnosis until really late because it was like, well, you did fine in school.
Right.
Like, you're capable. Right. You figured it out. You're fine. And it's like, well, I figured it out at like a huge cost to
your sanity overall.
Yeah. And the work that Gabor Mate has done around ADHD, I think is really interesting. He's a psychologist and therapist who works out of Vancouver, BC. But one of the things that I took as a big takeaway from him was that a lot of ADHD diagnoses can be related to a child not having the presence of the parent, the emotional presence. So it doesn't matter if your parent is like physically there, but if they can't be emotionally there for you because they're dealing with, you know, their own stuff and usually a cocktail of mental health issues themselves, that you're seeking constant stimulation from other sources and dopamine hits because you have come to know you can't rely on certain things for it. Yeah. And then that cycle continues and it changes and it adapts to different patterns. And I like just feel so much compassion for like younger me and everyone I know who has different diagnoses that relate to this, where it's like we're all just trying to find ways to cope and make like new systems for ourselves that will work. So it's like you lining up your stuffed animals and Beanie Babies. Maybe you were like, okay, these Beanie Babies are supposed to be worth something one day. We all thought that.
We did think so, didn't we? We thought holding on to those $1 million Beanie Babies.
But maybe you're also, to your point, like you already said, like you were trying to find some sense of order in like a very internally chaotic, you know, situation.
Totally.
Do you feel like before your diagnosis, you like look back on things that you've done to like cope and you're like, well, that system I kind of made up for myself and it actually kind of works and helps me, but I had to learn that through like trying all different things. Do you have things that you're like, actually, this is great, and it's now my superpower?
Yeah, I do. I love this question. So, everything in my life matches. I live a like monochrome life.
Yeah, sexy.
And I love it. It like genuinely like brings me joy, and I've been able to recognize that it's totally a system of like feeling a sense of like calm and peace.
Yes,
because you know it's just muted, but in like not like a bad way, but more so in like there's no distractions, right? So like, and I'm talking like everything. So everything from like my wardrobe to the way my home is decorated to my Google Calendar to, you know, the things that I buy, like everything is in like a neutral color palette. And I totally just like made that system up for myself, like somewhere along the way. And now that I am like more aware of that, I'm like, I actually like really love this though. Like I do. I walk into my home and I'm just like, oh, so like clean and simple and open and
consistent. Like a reliable and you have to make less choices, use less of your like energy trying to make 100%. Those decisions.
Yep.
Which is also interesting because you think about the way that people talk about it with like Steve Jobs and his turtleneck or whatever and his uniform. And then it's like, that's so smart. And then sometimes we look at it in other areas of our life and we're like, you have a problem. It's like, well, maybe we're all just trying to figure out these little ways.
Right.
Totally.
Well, and I mean, if Steve Jobs hadn't turned into Steve Jobs, people would think he had a problem.
Exactly.
You know, it's such a class.
Totally. Right. It's just like it worked for him. Right. And so he's idolized. And to your point, like there's probably a lot of people out there who are struggling with substance abuse who like couldn't find a system that worked for them or who, you know, didn't find a way to channel whatever they had going on into something that was recognized by other people, right? So I mean, it could go both ways so easily and so quickly.
I think that's so lovely to also look at it and be like, I love this system in my life. It like makes things easier. It makes me feel relaxed. And I absolutely am that way about like organizing in my house. I need everything to have a place. And I don't think I'm compulsive about it, but I'm very focused on it.
You're like, but it's important.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe where some of like the gray area is, right? 'Cause like there's certain things that I feel that I have like compulsions around, right? And like that's not necessarily one of them. And though like I do notice it and I do get distracted if there's like something that doesn't fit, and I do find it hard to like let it go, right?
But also works so well for branding. And I will say your aesthetic of everything that you do at Curate Wellco, I feel like every touch point is clearly your brand. And you've really made you can tell there's so much intention, but it also doesn't feel like anything other than just like, wow, this is a very smart, amazing brand from the outside, you know? 100%. And I think again, not, and this isn't to diminish it, but I think you hear about designers and creatives who are like so anal or whatever. And it's like it has to be their vision. And it's like, well, sometimes that makes something great.
Yeah. And there's, challenges with that, right? Specifically as I started like growing a team, and it's been like kind of an ongoing dialogue with my team of like, here are the things that are like up for discussion, and here are the things that, for the integrity of like the vision and the experience that I really want to provide and what we stand for as a company are the things that are like less up for discussion or not up for discussion at all.
Yeah.
You started Curate Co. before your diagnosis, but then you had your diagnosis, and I'm curious, after kind of having more of an understanding of where you were at and what was going on with you, did it cause you to approach an aspect of your business differently than you had before? Did you find that you needed to navigate it differently before you kind of started to bring on your team? And then I'm curious about the team, how you're navigating that as well.
Yeah, totally. So I started growing a team years before my diagnosis.
Okay.
And in retrospect, I can look back and be like, oh, cool. Not a great manager to these people. And this is definitely like part of why. It's a
learning curve.
It's to be a good manager.
Yeah.
I mean, just in general, right? To like be a good manager, to be a good people leader is one of the hardest parts about growing a business. And then you throw in this kind of like intrinsic need to like feel control, and it's just like a disaster waiting to happen. So, lots of turnover for like lots of reasons, right? Sometimes it wasn't the right fit. Sometimes it was like a hard skill thing. And sometimes it was totally me and the way I was showing up in that relationship that I didn't necessarily have control over or was even like aware of, but was totally a thing. So I think that I don't really approach things super differently now with a diagnosis, but I do have more of an appreciation for the things that we do really well within the company because of the diagnosis. And I'm able to kind of like lean into that in a new way, right? So like, for example, everything feels thought through. That's feedback that we get like very, very, very consistently, like so thorough, no stone unturned. Like our clients are just like, I've never like felt this supported throughout like an entire process.
That's the best feedback you could get, honestly. I'm like, you're doing that. Like, you don't need to do anything else.
I know. And it's just like, it makes me so happy to know that like people feel that way when they're, interacting with me and my team and our brand and like all of those things. And I'm now able to recognize like, that's because I like literally can't like let that one last detail go, right? Like if I know that it's possible, we have to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think I have like more of an appreciation for that, right? Like one of the things that I think is so common in entrepreneurship and especially with like social media being such a huge thing is this like comparison, right? And like, what if this person does what I do? Or what if this person steals my idea? Or what if this person, whatever. And I think that I've been able to really come to terms with the fact we've had that happen to us a lot, right? And it kind of comes with the territory, unfortunately. But I think I've gotten a lot more like, not like okay with that, but just like accepting of it because I'm just like literally like pathologically, you cannot do this the way that we do it. Right. Like you're not gonna want to, because it's like a lot of work. And it's just, so in some ways kind of just turning it into an advantage. Not to say that it doesn't still come with challenges, right? But I think I'm able to be like, cool, like this is, I don't want to say like feeding the compulsion because like, that's not healthy for me. And also like I'm medicated now. And so it's a lot, everything's like done, like, softer by like a degree of like 50. But in some ways just like honoring the compulsion, right? Of like, if I really like feel like I want to like do this thing, it's like, okay, let's do it. Let's do that extra 10% that like a lot of other people don't feel like doing or think about doing or feel the need to do or want to do. And that gets to benefit our clients. Like that gets to benefit people. And that feels really good to like almost use it for good.
Yeah. You're channeling that energy. I mean, you're really, you're giving that energy and those compulsions a place to work, which is beautiful. And also, I think a really great point to make because I think something can be said for all neurodivergencies in terms of like, we as a society, I think typically look at neurodivergencies or mental health diagnosis as something that's like wrong, right? Or needs to be fixed. I think that's the general idea. Now you and I, we all know that that's not true, right? That there are absolutely superpowers and all of the things that are unique to us. And so the fact that you were able to hone in on this for yourself and say, you know what? Yeah, obviously there's a shadow and a light side to this experience, but on the light side, I can really channel this and put all of that energy towards the thing that I'm really passionate about that then feeds back into my community. And I think we all can do that with, our neurodivergencies and the things that make us unique. I think also there are people out there who are looking for that, right? It's like there are specific clients out there who are looking for your thoroughness, right? Who are looking for those people who do just that extra step. And there may be people out there who don't need that, who don't want that, who may be bothered by that, right? Those are the people who are going to come to you. But the people who want that you're their cup of tea, they're going to love coming and working with you. And so I just think it's really, I'm glad that you said that. I think it's really important because I think a lot of the time what happens on both ends, one, to your point about, comparison and people doing the thing that you do or people stealing, but then also this idea of like being othered and being, having this thing that a lot of people look at as bad. It's like, it is really truly a thing that makes you unique, and it's going to show up uniquely on you than it would another person. And that is what you can continue to utilize to build your business, to bring in clients, to work with customers, I just think it's so important to hit on that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, in your day-to-day and week-to-week life, what are the things that help set you up to feel like you can be at your kind of optimal, space to run your business? And in that mix, do you use intuition to help guide you? Like, what's your relationship with that in there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, totally. I am, so one of the things that one of my mentors said to me once that I really like embraced and now like say to my team is logistics are a love language. And so I am I believe that like nothing can happen without a foundation of like really sexy logistics, right? Maybe if you like try really hard and the stars align and like everything works out for you, you get like a perfect outcome if it's like, a shit show in the middle. And like one of my core values is ease. And so I'm like, cool, if we can set up logistics so that everything feels easeful and we still get to that outcome, like 11 times out of 10, please let's do that, because I don't handle chaos super well, right? Like I have developed like, conflict management skills such that like if something happens, I can like pause, ground, handle the situation, but I don't like to operate that way at all.
Yeah. What is an example of your super sexy logistic systems? I'm like taking notes. I'm like, what is one where you're like, you nailed that?
Let's see. I'll use an example. So we bring a lot of our clients here to Santa Barbara to work in person.
Nice.
And one of the things that we do when they come do that experience ahead of time is we have them fill out a form. And we're asking them questions, like all the normal questions, right? But also questions like, do you have any food allergies? Do you have any food preferences? What do you typically like to snack on? What do you do when you're in a town you've never been in before to like get to know what it's like? What do you do when you're on vacation and you really want to relax? And so we've built in this form that has all of these questions so that when they get here, we've planned this experience that is just like completely custom to them. And it's not hard because they've given us enough information for us to like make the choices that are like great for them, right? So for example, some people find it super relaxing to like go on a bike ride. I'm not one of those people. But
yeah, I'm not checking yes on that box.
And other people are like, I love to like sit by the pool all day. And it's like, great. So we're able to like kind of craft this experience for them that really makes it something that they enjoy. And then they like go to leave and they're like, this is amazing. And we're like, yeah, we know. Like we made it for you. So I think that's one thing that I'm really, really proud of. And then once that's in place, then we can kind of, it's very systematized, but it's also really high touch and really intentional and really thought through. And I love that it's not like one or the other, right? Like a lot of people talk about like scale in your business. Like how do we make this scalable? And I think that sexy logistics are logistics that like are scalable, right? We're able to run those. We could do, have someone here every single week and it would run smoothly. So it's scalable and it doesn't feel automated.
Right. It still feels personalized and like it's got that touch. Yeah.
Yep.
I think that one thing that you're hitting on, right, is like the importance of routine, but like still having a sense or like a route to flexibility,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a couple like sexy logistics, I think that really set me up for success. I keep all of my devices on do not disturb all the time.
Okay,
I get no notifications.
I was going to say, I was like, same.
Can we talk about this? Because people are annoyed with me that I do this, but I'm like, I will be distracted all day.
All the time.
If I have anything, it doesn't matter what it is. It's like
totally
Poshmark being like, join another spring party or something.
I had to leave Poshmark because I was like, this is entirely overwhelming. Like death by notifications. Like
Really.
So that's been like life changing for me. And like I still am responsive. Like I still check things. I just like that was a really big kind of like symptom for me was that I wasn't able to like not check notifications, right? Like obsession compulsion. I had this like compulsive need to like clear my notifications. And so by just like not getting them, it empowers me with choice, right? I can choose when I want to look at them and I can choose not to look at them and I can, all of that. So
it brings the power back to you instead of obviously these things are designed with the psychology in mind.
Yeah,
exactly.
Do you check your notifications like 3 times a day or do you just like, okay.
No, because, I do value communication. I do value responsiveness. I do value, like workability. And I think workability starts to break down sometimes when we're over boundaried. Not that having times that you check your notifications during the day is necessarily over boundaried. But I've encountered a lot of people who, in my opinion, are a little bit over boundaried around things like, access and communication and responsiveness and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, love this for you. And also like, we are not able to execute on this project because you will not respond to me.
Right. Exactly.
And that drives me.
Like it's not necessarily realistic or sustainable.
Exactly.
I've never thought of the idea of being over boundaried is like a really interesting concept.
Well, it's like the pendulum swing between extremes that we all do for various forms of coping. And I think sometimes it's like finding out what is a center that is workable for me and then also the other people in my life. But I also, when you're at the beginning of a lot of those stages, I think sometimes being over boundaried is one of the only things that feels safe at the beginning of like a certain journey sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if people are doing it, it's because they feel a need to do it. Right. So I'm not like discounting that at all. Right. We're all just like trying our best to like show up in this world that is like entirely fucked up. Right. So like everyone needs to do what they need to do. Yeah. For me personally, I haven't found that having set times during the day when I check my notifications was like actually like doing anything for me. So I don't have that. It's just like I check them when I check them and I don't when I don't. And in the meantime, I'm not getting like quirky sounds that are like driving me nuts.
Yeah.
I don't know what y'all know about any of the other personality way of being like metrics there are, but I'm a manifester.
Okay, I was literally just about to ask you this question.
I can give you all my labels. So I'm a manifester. So I think that that's another thing that like factors into this, right? Is I have really big energy, right? I have this like tidal wave energy where like I pull all the way back and then I come all the way forward. And I have a lot of like open centers. I'm really, really influenced by other people's energy.
Ooh, same.
So if I don't have that time to like regulate myself, I'm all over the place.
It makes a lot of sense.
And going back to your earlier question about intuition, I'm a very intuitive person. And I think that part of what fed into a lot of like my development of OCD was actually like ignoring that intuition.
Interesting. Can you dive into that a little bit deeper?
So I think that as a society, we have like a very like complicated relationship with intuition, right? We've got like people on one end of the spectrum that are like, intuition is like the word of everything. Like that is what I do no matter what. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got people who are like very like logical, practical, facts, data, etc. And not only does like every individual person like exist somewhere on this spectrum, but as a society, I feel like depending on like the season or the day or like world events, we like swing from like one end to the other in a way that like favors whoever's in charge.
Yeah.
So when I was growing, I've always been really intuitive, right? Which is wrapped up in like the manifestor pattern, right? I'm like ego driven, right? So like I have that like that sense of self, that just like gut knowing like, yep, this is it. And I make really quick decisions. I'm a fast processor. I'm able to feel things in my body pretty immediately and pretty clearly. And I think that a lot of the time when I was growing up, you know, I not only have this strong intuition, but I also have this like huge like horsepower behind it in that like manifestor way, right? Where like I would totally contract, right? And go internal and very like introspective and really like in my own thoughts, and then kind of like emerge from that and be like, cool, I'm going to do these 180 things in the next hour and they're going to be great and they're going to be hugely successful.
Bang, bang, boom.
Exactly. And so I think that I stifled both of those things, my intuition and this kind of like big energy expansion and contraction, to fit into kind of like, you know, the normative majority code, right?
Yeah.
Like being like, hey, I kind of just want to like, you know, be by myself for the next like 2 weeks and then like emerge and like build a whole website. Like that's not when you're like young and in school and, you know, your parents have like expectations of you and there's like society and whatever, that's like not a super easy thing to do. And so I don't know like what's been studied around this. We do have one client who's a therapist who looks at the connection between human design and like some mental disorders. And she told me a little bit about that, but it's not my area of expertise. But
that's so interesting.
Yeah, but I think that fed into it, right? Is like this need to like control and stifle and try to minimize like these obsessions. And then as a result, instead of like kind of riding those waves, right? Being okay with making a big decision just because it feels right and I just know, or being okay with the fact that like I need alone time and then I need to like create something, instead of just like allowing those things to like allow me to operate the way I operate. I think that a lot of that energy got channeled into like compulsions, right? Of like, oh, I'll just do this one thing instead because I get that like little like
immediate like gratification.
Right, exactly.
Totally.
Wow.
It makes me think of two things, like especially the witch wound, which we talk about, which is the idea of essentially in a nutshell, but we have a few great episodes on it, like being the fear of being too much and the fear of not being enough, and how that relates back to just like persecution of women, you know, over a long period of time. And then it makes me think of also how all of these meaning-making systems that we are attracted to or identify with or curious about to help us understand ourselves, it really makes me wonder about that being a path, especially for people who are neurodivergent and maybe don't have access or don't identify with certain modes of like Western psychology. And they're like, this doesn't really work for me. This doesn't help me. And how that there is definitely a Venn diagram there, an overlapping of creative, intuitive, spiritual people who are attracted to these meaning-making systems.
Definitely.
What's something that you would whisper to your past self, maybe before you had this diagnosis, maybe when you were just starting your business, or like knowing what you know now, what's something you would almost like gift to your past self in terms of like whispering in her ear?
I think I would say your questions have answers.
Ooh.
Love that.
You're a quote queen, okay?
Truly. I have written so many things down where I'm like,
that is like aha moment, Oprah, let's just do it. You know, we're here. That's great. Your questions have answers. That's beautiful.
Okay. I hope you have an answer to my next question, which is what kind of tools or apps or programs do you use in your personal life or business that you're just like, I'm obsessed with this. Everyone needs to use it. Because as a logistics queen, I'm sure you have many.
So on the business side, ClickUp is huge. That's what we use for our like project management system. And yeah, like OCD dream. It's amazing. And then I don't really use a lot of apps on the personal side. I've really tried to like actually like minimize a lot of that.
Are you like pen and paper kind of journal?
No, I live a paperless life.
Okay. I'm like, do you use the Notes app?
I jot things down in the Notes app, but I try to like consolidate later. So like once every however long, I go through my Notes app and like copy and paste everything to like where it should actually be living and then like delete them. I'm not a pen to paper person. I really, really have like wanted to be for a long time in my life, but like this is a really good like OCD example thing. So like my handwriting is not good. Like I just kind of like bypassed that phase in school and I learned how to type instead and whatever. And so like I really, really want to be someone who like keeps a beautiful bullet journal and like has this wonderful handwriting and like has, you know, the notebook and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh yes, I love that. And I can't do that. And then I try and I get really, really frustrated that it doesn't look good. And it like totally distracts me from like whatever I'm like writing down for whatever purpose I'm supposed to be writing it down for. So like not productive or helpful for me.
I'm like same.
Yeah.
I think the grass is always greener though, because as somebody who is that person, then you just end up with like hundreds of journals, like some of them half filled all over the house. So there are pros and cons.
Yeah, totally. I would maybe say, okay, this is like maybe a little bit of a stretch, but when I like really need to focus, I will put on like lo-fi or like white noise or something like that. So I have some good Spotify playlists that I go back to like multiple times a week.
Same. I work very well with a certain like tempo of music. And I also have now realized that even if I just put my headphones on without music, it's like mentally I'm in the work zone.
Love that. I might try that.
Pia, outside of, you know, I know that you mentioned that you are taking medication now for OCD, but I'm curious, what does self-care look like for you with your diagnosis outside of medication?
Oh, I love that. So I think on like a really like accessible fundamental level, it's like just indulging myself in like the things that I, you know, have like that compulsion around. So for example, you know, we're building out this coffee bus and we ordered all the big stuff and, you know, now we're ordering all the little stuff and there's like 18 million little things, right? And oh, my poor team. I'm like, okay, I want, you know, black milk pitchers, whatever. And then they come and I'm like, okay, but these aren't like black. I'm like, we have to return them. Like we have to return them and get different ones. And luckily, you know, I'm pretty open with my team. And I also like took ownership of like, I know this is excessive. I know this is a lot. And thank you for returning them and getting them. So I think just like allowing myself to like ask for those things and allowing it feels like an indulgence, right? Of like, I'm not going to suck it up, right? Like it's so easy to return this Amazon package. I'm just going to get a different one and we'll have a replacement in 2 days. So I think just really leaning into those things and doing it in a way that is hopefully, you know, authentic and a little bit self-deprecating, right? And like and like humorous and like acknowledging of like, I know this is ridiculous and I'm asking you to do it anyways. So that has been huge for my self-care, and that's just like all day, every day, right? And just making sure that there's like levity with it, right? Levity and ownership, right? Of like, I know this is inconvenient for you. And
we're here.
I'm still asking you to do it.
I love it.
So that's been huge. I love to see the ocean. So I try to walk outside every single day. I try to see the ocean a couple times a week. That's huge for me. And physical movement. So, you know, kind of at my like lowest bottom before my diagnosis, I had like totally abandoned going to the gym, which was something that, I did 5 days a week for like 8 straight years, and something that I loved and like, derived a lot of joy from. And I just like completely stopped and like couldn't get myself back in. And I'm now like very much like back at the gym, and I've gotten back in shape and kind of gotten back over that hump, and is now something that like brings me a lot of joy again. So that's been huge.
Awesome. It's also inspiring because I feel like I'm in a similar boat where I'm like, I was being very consistent for a long time and then just fell off and went into a little bit of depression and haven't been able to get back on. But, no, it's very inspiring and really helpful also to know. I think, again, this is kind of the second time you hit on this, but in a different way, which I think is so important, because it speaks on how you navigate and how you engage, like your relationship to OCD, that it's not something that's like separate from you, that you like keep at arm's length. That's like bad. No, it's something that you have embraced and you're building a relationship with, that you are actively engaged in, and that you take authority over, so that it's not controlling you. I think that, the idea of leaning into those indulgences, right, is like, it's so powerful. It's such a way of saying, I have this, it doesn't have me. And also like, this is fun, or like, right. Like there are aspects of this that I really can lean into, and like other people don't get to like have these experiences, right? Like they don't know like that the difference between onyx black and charcoal black is going to be like a huge, like.
I feel so seen. Oh my gosh.
And thank you for sharing, because as I feel like I've discovered through this conversation, because I just didn't know this much about OCD, that I'm sure that there are a lot of people who will hear this who are probably experiencing symptoms and they're not aware. And I feel like they may recognize themselves in this. So again, thank you. I really appreciate your vulnerability in talking about this. It really means a lot, really, Pia.
Yeah. Thank you. Much, I feel so seen. There are so many different blacks. PSA.
Yes.
Just in the interest of, I think just like extending, some words to anyone who might be listening to this that is seeing themselves in some of these things, either in like a very direct way or an indirect way. Getting this diagnosis, getting on medication was like one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And there still, I think, is a lot of stigma around that.
Yes.
And my only regret is that I didn't do it 20 years ago.
Wow. That's really helpful to hear, because I think there's so much stigma around so many diagnoses. One, but to your point, also medication and figuring out what that looks like for you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Pia. You're awesome.
Thank you for your wonderful questions. I appreciate both of you so much.
We're so happy to have you. I think this conversation will be so helpful to our community in so many ways. How can people connect with you and work with Curate Wellco? We'll definitely link your incredible podcast. I listen to it. You have such great guests, and I appreciate the diversity of like topics as well. It's really a wonderful listen. So we'll link that. But how can people connect further with you and Curate Wellco?
Yeah. So, Instagram is a great place to find us and just kind of get, the bird's eye view of what we're all about. Our website has a ton of information on it. We try really hard to be as transparent as possible in terms of what our process looks like and pricing and all of that. So you can find us on Instagram at curatewellco, all one word. And then our website is curatewell.co. And then my team and I are actually launching our sister company in January, which is totally unrelated. It is a coffee truck.
Oh, I saw that. I was wondering if that was like a thing of the past. That's so cool. It is a thing
of the present and future. We're stoked. So that's called Considered. So you can also find us on Instagram at consideredsb.co.
Amazing. Thanks,
awesome.
Pia.
Thank you, Pia.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
The 12 Pies is produced by yours truly, Wallace Miller Blanchard. Our theme music is made by Nathan McKay, and our wonderful editing is done by Softer Sound Studios, who you can find more information about in our show notes.